I used to think I'd leave the company quietly, like so many other women pushed off Wall Street's power track. But then the CFO looked me straight in the eye and uttered one word: irrelevant. That's when I knew I'd destroy him, not by screaming, but with federal law. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine came with an SEC investigation number and 9 counts of insider trading. My name is Nora Caldwell. And until 6 months ago, I believed in the system. 37 years old, Princeton MBA, 12 years climbing the ladder at Aldridge & Co. I'd built my reputation one risk assessment at a time, turning the Charlotte office from a regional outpost into a profit center that caught New York's attention. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional. The kind of exceptional that made men uncomfortable. The trouble started when our CEO retired. The board brought in fresh blood, a Harvard golden boy who promised dynamic restructuring and aggressive growth strategies. His first move? Hiring Lucas Trammell as CFO, 48, silver-haired, with the kind of swagger that only comes from never having your competence questioned. Lucas walked into Aldridge like he owned it, which, given his equity stake from the signing bonus, wasn't far from the truth. From day one, he made it clear I didn't fit his vision. In meetings, he'd talk over me mid-sentence. My risk reports, once required reading, suddenly needed additional review from his hand-picked analysts. Kids fresh from Wharton who couldn't spot market manipulation if it was highlighted in neon. When I pushed back on a dubious acquisition target, he smiled that particular smile men reserve for women they consider hysterical. "Nora," he'd say, stretching my name like taffy. "Let's not overthink this." But I knew what I was seeing: patterns in the data that didn't add up, trading volumes that spiked days before announcements, shell companies in Delaware with familiar surnames on the incorporation documents, the kind of breadcrumbs that led straight to an SEC investigation, if anyone bothered to look. I tried the proper channels first, documented everything, sent memos up the chain. Each one came back with Lucas's notes in the margins. Speculation. Unsubstantiated. Outside your purview. That last one stung the most. Risk assessment was literally my job title. The breaking point came during the Q3 strategy meeting. 22 executives around a mahogany table, and I was the only woman. I'd prepared a presentation on irregularities in our recent M&A activities, complete with timeline overlays showing suspicious trading patterns. Lucas let me get 3 slides in before he stood up. "I think we've heard enough," he said, clicking off the projector with my remote. "This kind of paranoid thinking is exactly why we need fresh perspectives in risk management." The room went silent. 21 pairs of eyes avoided mine. "I'm not paranoid," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm doing my job." He laughed, actually laughed, and turned to address the room as if I'd already left. "The problem with some people," he said, "is they can't distinguish between being thorough and being irrelevant." Irrelevant. The word hung in the air like a challenge. In that moment, watching him dismiss 12 years of my expertise with a single word, I made a decision. If he wanted to play dangerous games with federal securities law, I'd make sure he lost. But I wouldn't do it their way. No HR complaints, no resignation letters, no giving him the satisfaction of seeing me walk away defeated. No, I'd do it my way. Quietly, methodically, thoroughly. After all, I'd spent over a decade learning exactly how the system worked. Time to show Lucas Trammell what irrelevance really looked like. The next morning, I arrived at the office wearing my sharpest suit, the charcoal Armani that made me feel like armor. If Lucas wanted me gone, he'd have to work for it. I smiled at his assistant, complimented the CEO's new initiative in the elevator, played the game perfectly. Let them think they'd broken me. My real work began after hours. The beautiful thing about being considered irrelevant is that people stop watching you. It never revoked my access to the historical trading databases. The compliance team stopped copying me on reports, but my login still worked. Lucas's own arrogance became my greatest asset. He'd never changed the default passwords on the departmental share drives. I started with public records, Lucas's financial disclosures showed a modest portfolio for a CFO. Too modest. Then I dug deeper. His brother, Marcus Trammell, ran a small investment firm in Raleigh. Perfectly legal. But Marcus's trading patterns told a different story. Every time Aldridge prepared for a major announcement, Marcus's firm made prescient moves, not obvious enough to trigger automated SEC alerts, but clear as day when you map them against our internal timeline. The Slack messages were a goldmine. Lucas wasn't tech-savvy enough to know that deleted messages lived on in the company's backup servers. I found conversations between him and his brother, carefully worded but damning in context. Family dinner Sunday. Bring that wine we discussed. 2 days before we announced the Meridian acquisition. Mom's birthday next month. Already got her gift sorted. The day before our earnings report beat analyst expectations by 40%. 9 times in 6 months. 9 trades that netted Marcus's firm approximately $3.2 million in profits. Each one small enough to fly under the radar, together forming a pattern of systematic insider trading that would make any federal prosecutor salivate. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots, timestamps, trading records cross-referenced with internal memos. I built a case that would make my risk assessment reports look like casual observations. But I needed more than data. I needed proof of intent. That's when I started watching Lucas more carefully. He had tells, the way he'd tap his Mont Blanc pen during meetings when discussing sensitive information, how he'd schedule personal calls immediately after board meetings, the way his assistant would book conference rooms for client meetings that never appeared on the official calendar. One Thursday evening, I stayed late, pretending to work on the quarterly risk report nobody would read. Lucas was in his office with 2 men I didn't recognize. The door was closed, but voices carry in our glass-walled building. I caught fragments. Position before the announcement. Keep it under 10,000 shares. Where through the Cayman account. I recorded nothing, too risky. But I memorized every detail, cross-referenced the visitor's log, found their names. Both ran hedge funds that had recently taken positions in companies Aldridge was quietly courting. By December, I had enough evidence to bury him. But timing was everything. I couldn't just dump this on the SEC and hope for the best. I needed to be strategic, thorough. All the things Lucas claimed I wasn't. I created a timeline, color-coded and cross-referenced, built a narrative that even a first-year law student could follow, compiled evidence that would survive any legal scrutiny. Then I waited for the perfect moment. It came sooner than expected. Lucas announced a departmental restructuring that would effectively eliminate my position, folding risk assessment under his direct control. The memo was CC'd to the entire executive team. The subtext was clear: Nora Caldwell was officially irrelevant. That night, I went home and opened a bottle of wine. Not to mourn my career, but to toast what was coming. I had one more move to make, and Lucas would never see it coming. After all, irrelevant people make the best hunters. Nobody watches them climb into position. The submission process to the SEC required precision. I couldn't use my work computer or home IP address. Too traceable. Instead, I spent a Saturday at a public library in Greensboro, creating an anonymous Proton Mail account and using their secure upload portal. The whistleblower form was comprehensive, demanding details that only an insider could provide. Perfect. I labeled my report Systematic Insider Trading Scheme at Aldridge & Co. and methodically uploaded every piece of evidence: transaction records showing Marcus Trammell's trades, internal emails discussing confidential mergers, a timeline mapping Lucas's personal calls to his brother's investment activities, screenshots of those damning Slack messages, even a psychological profile I'd compiled, showing how Lucas's pattern of behavior indicated deliberate, repeated violations. The most damaging evidence was a spreadsheet I discovered hidden in a mislabeled folder on the shared drive. Lucas had actually tracked his brother's profits, calculating his own informal commission, 2% of gains, wired monthly to an account in the Bahamas. The hubris of it stunned even me. He'd documented his own crimes like a businessman tracking legitimate revenue. Submitting the report felt anticlimactic. Just a confirmation number, WB 2024-3847. I memorized it, then cleared the browser history and left. On the drive back to Charlotte, I felt oddly calm. The die was cast. Monday morning, I perfected my performance. I responded to Lucas's restructuring memo with professional grace, offering to assist with the transition. I volunteered to train my replacement. I smiled in meetings, took notes, acted like a beaten woman accepting her fate. Lucas grew more comfortable, more careless. He even complimented my mature response to organizational changes in front of the board. The waiting was excruciating. Days turned to weeks. I'd read that SEC investigations could take months, even years. Maybe my report had been buried in bureaucracy. Maybe they didn't care about another financial executive gaming the system. Maybe I'd risked everything for nothing. I started job hunting, keeping up appearances, had lunch with headhunters, updated my LinkedIn, let everyone see Nora Caldwell moving on gracefully. Meanwhile, Lucas grew bolder. His trades became larger, more frequent. He'd brought 2 more family members into his scheme, a cousin in Florida, a nephew in Texas. The cancer was metastasizing. 5 weeks after my submission, I noticed something. Lucas's assistant had blocked out his entire morning schedule for a personal matter. He arrived late, around 11 a.m., looking pale. That afternoon, the head of legal booked an emergency meeting with the CEO. The corporate lawyers from Raleigh were called in. I felt it building like a storm system. Pressure dropping, electricity in the air. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every detail, wondering if I'd left any trace that could lead back to me. The whistleblower protections were strong, but Lucas had resources. If he suspected? Tuesday morning brought validation. I was in the break room when Lucas's assistant rushed past, crying. Through the glass walls, I watched federal agents in Navy windbreakers enter Lucas's office. SEC Enforcement Division. They were professional. Quiet. But their presence sent shockwaves through the floor. Executives huddled in corners. Assistants whispered frantically. The king was falling. Lucas emerged 40 minutes later, flanked by agents and his lawyer. He wasn't in handcuffs, white-collar criminals rarely are, but his expression was that of a man watching his world collapse. As they led him past the break room, our eyes met for a brief moment. I kept my face neutral, confused, appropriately shocked like everyone else. But I wanted him to see me, to remember who'd been in the room when he'd called me irrelevant. The office erupted the moment the elevator doors closed. Speculation ran wild. Most assumed it was about the Meridian deal or the Q3 earnings. Nobody suspected the truth was far worse, that their CFO had been running a family insider trading ring that would make headlines for weeks. I poured myself another coffee with steady hands. Around me, my colleagues panicked about their own exposure, their stock options, their reputations. Valid concerns. Aldridge & Co. would never fully recover from this scandal. But I didn't care about Aldridge anymore. I'd done what I came to do. Lucas Trammell had taught me an invaluable lesson. In corporate America, being dismissed as irrelevant was the greatest weapon a woman could have. Nobody suspects the person they've already written off. The aftermath was everything I'd imagined and more. Within hours, the story broke on Bloomberg. Aldridge & Co., CFO arrested in insider trading probe. By market close, our stock had dropped 18%. The board called an emergency meeting, the parking lot filled with news vans. Everyone wanted to know how deep the rot went. I played my part flawlessly. When HR called an all-hands meeting, I sat in the middle row, not too close, not too far. I gasped at the appropriate moments as our CEO outlined the alleged violations and promised full cooperation with authorities. When colleagues speculated about who might have known, I offered measured opinions that led nowhere. I was just another shocked employee watching the empire burn. The SEC's investigation moved with stunning efficiency. They froze accounts, seized documents, interviewed dozens of employees. I was called in on a Thursday afternoon, just another name on their list. Two agents, both women, professionally courteous. They asked about my role, my interactions with Lucas, whether I'd noticed anything unusual. He never included me in strategic discussions, I said truthfully. After the restructuring announcement, I had minimal contact with his department. They nodded, made notes. One asked if I'd ever raised concerns about financial irregularities. I tried, I said, producing copies of my ignored memos. But Mr. Trammell made it clear my input wasn't valued. He called me irrelevant. The agents exchanged glances. The word hung in the air, context shifting its meaning. Here was a woman sidelined by a corrupt executive, her warnings dismissed. The narrative wrote itself. They thanked me for my time. I never heard from them again. The investigation's scope stunned everyone. 9 family members implicated. 37 illegal trades documented. Over $8 million illicit profits traced through a web of offshore accounts. Lucas's photograph became synonymous with corporate greed, the silver-haired executive in handcuffs. His empire of insider trading laid bare. The trial date was set for the following year, but Lucas's career ended the moment those agents walked into his office. His assets were frozen. His wife filed for divorce. His country club membership was quietly revoked. The man who'd strutted through our halls like a king became a pariah overnight. I submitted my resignation 2 weeks later, citing the need for a fresh start after recent events. The CEO accepted it with relief. They were cleaning house anyway. My colleagues threw a small farewell party. Some whispered that I was lucky to escape before the real investigations began. If only they knew. My final day. I packed my office slowly. 12 years reduced to 3 boxes. As I walked past Lucas's former office, now stripped bare, crime scene tape recently removed, I felt no triumph. Just cold satisfaction. Justice isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about ensuring the guilty lose. The security guard who walked me out was chatty, nervous about his own job security. Crazy about Mr. Trammell, he said as we waited for the elevator. Never would have guessed. He seemed so smart. Smart people often make the stupidest mistakes, I replied. Outside, Charlotte's December air was crisp, clean. I loaded my boxes into my car and took one last look at the Aldridge building, somewhere in federal custody. Lucas Trammell was learning what irrelevance really meant. No more corner office, no more power lunches, no more deciding who mattered and who didn't. I drove away without looking back. There were other firms, other opportunities. My reputation remained intact. The risk analyst who'd tried to warn them, ignored by a criminal CFO. If anything, the story enhanced my resume. Recruiters were already calling, but I wasn't ready for another corporate battlefield. Not yet. First, I wanted to savor this moment. The system I'd believed in had failed me, so I'd used it to destroy the man who'd tried to destroy me. They say revenge is empty, that it doesn't bring satisfaction. They're wrong. Revenge, properly executed, is a beautiful thing. It's justice delivered by the wronged, balance restored by those deemed powerless. Lucas Trammell had made one fatal error. He'd dismissed me as irrelevant. In the end, that dismissal cost him everything. 3 months into my sabbatical, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Dilworth when I saw her. Lucas's wife, former wife, Helen Trammell. She looked different. The carefully maintained blonde highlights had grown out, the designer clothes replaced with simple elegance. Our eyes met across the room. I expected anger, maybe accusations. Instead, she walked over. "May I?" She gestured to the empty chair. I nodded, curious. "I know what you did," she said quietly, stirring her latte. Lucas figured it out during discovery. The FBI showed him the technical analysis of the submission, the writing patterns, the specific knowledge only someone from risk assessment would have. He knows it was you. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." She smiled, a bitter, knowing expression. "Don't worry, he can't prove it, and even if he could, whistleblower protections are ironclad. Besides, he's got bigger problems. They found 12 more trades they hadn't included in the original indictment. His lawyer says he's looking at 15 to 20 years. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with normal life. People working on laptops, friends chatting, a world away from federal investigations and destroyed careers. I wanted to thank you, Helen continued. For 23 years, I lived with his ego, his casual cruelty, his belief that everyone else existed to serve his ambitions. I watched him destroy careers, ruin reputations, all while playing the successful executive at charity galas. I stayed because that's what women of my generation did. Why thank me? I asked carefully. Because you did what I never had the courage to do. You held him accountable. She pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. The divorce settlement was quite generous. The lawyers wanted me gone before more scandals surfaced. I wanted you to know that some good came from this. I'm funding a scholarship program for women in finance. First-generation college students, the kind Lucas would have overlooked entirely. I didn't touch the envelope. That's not necessary. I know. She stood, gathering her purse. But irrelevant women should stick together, don't you think? After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $100,000 made out to the Irrelevant Women's Finance Scholarship. The memo line read, "For those who refuse to be dismissed." I never cashed it. Instead, I framed it. A reminder that justice has ripple effects beyond our intentions. The financial press followed Lucas's case obsessively. Each revelation was worse than the last. He'd been trading on inside information for nearly a decade. The family network extended to 16 members across 7 states. The offshore accounts held millions in hidden profits. Former colleagues distanced themselves, claiming they'd always suspected something was off. I watched from afar, living off savings while I decided what came next. Headhunters called daily. My story had become legend in certain circles. The woman who'd stood up to corruption, whose warnings went unheeded. Firms wanted to hire me as proof of their commitment to ethics. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months after Lucas's arrest, I accepted a position as chief risk officer at a boutique firm in Atlanta. During the final interview, the female CEO asked me point blank, "Did you bring down Lucas Trammell?" I documented concerns that were dismissed, I replied. Someone else must have seen what I saw. She smiled knowingly. Well, whoever that someone was, they did the industry a service. We need more people willing to stand up to the old boys network. My first day at the new firm, I found a bottle of champagne on my desk with a note, "To new beginnings and relevant perspectives." No signature, but I recognized Helen's handwriting. That night, I stood on my new apartment's balcony, looking out over Atlanta's skyline. Somewhere in federal detention, Lucas Trammell was learning to navigate a world where his Harvard MBA meant nothing, where his silver hair and confident swagger held no power. He'd spend the next 2 decades being truly irrelevant, a number in a system that didn't care about his connections or ego. Some might say I'd lost too. My career at Aldridge, 12 years of building relationships and reputation. But they'd be wrong. I'd traded complicity for conviction, silence for justice. Lucas had taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. In corporate America, being dismissed as irrelevant isn't a weakness. It's a weapon. And I'd wielded it perfectly. The trial began on a rainy Tuesday in September. I wasn't required to attend, whistleblowers rarely are, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see the final act of the drama I'd set in motion. I slipped into the federal courthouse in downtown Charlotte, choosing a seat in the back row of the public gallery. Lucas entered in a navy suit that hung loose on his diminished frame. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a man who'd lost everything. His legal team flanked him, 3 attorneys who'd already burned through most of his frozen assets. When he scanned the courtroom, his eyes found mine. For a moment, raw hatred flashed across his face, then nothing. He turned away. The prosecution's case was devastating. They'd built on my foundation, uncovering layers of corruption I hadn't even suspected. Lucas hadn't just traded on inside information, he'd created an entire ecosystem of fraud. Shell companies, bribed analysts, manipulated reports. The 9 trades I documented were merely the tip of the iceberg. On the third day, they called Marcus Trammell to testify. Lucas's brother had flipped immediately, accepting a plea deal in exchange for testimony. He detailed their scheme with the dispassion of someone saving his own skin. Every family dinner that doubled as a strategy session, every coded phone call, every wire transfer. He even produced recordings. Apparently, he'd been covering his own tracks for years. "Did your brother ever express concern about getting caught?" the prosecutor asked. "Never," Marcus replied. Lucas said he was untouchable, said the board was too stupid to notice and his employees too scared to speak up. I thought of my ignored memos, my dismissed concerns, too scared to speak up. If only Lucas had known. The defense's strategy was predictable: blame everyone else. Marcus was a lying opportunist. The trades were coincidences. The offshore accounts were for tax purposes. Lucas was a victim of overzealous prosecution. A successful executive being torn down by jealous subordinates. His lead attorney even suggested a disgruntled employee might have fabricated evidence. I kept my expression neutral as the lawyer spun theories about anonymous tipsters with vendettas. Let them chase shadows. The SEC protects whistleblower identities zealously. And I'd been careful. Very careful. On the 5th day, something unexpected happened. The prosecution called a surprise witness, Diana Morrison, Lucas's former assistant at his previous firm. She testified about a similar pattern from 8 years ago: suspicious trades, family members who got lucky, concerns dismissed when raised. The statute of limitations had expired, but the pattern was damning. Lucas wasn't a first-time offender who'd made mistakes. He was a serial criminal who'd finally been caught. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all 17 counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. As the foreman read each verdict, Lucas gripped the defense table until his knuckles went white. His wife, a new, younger one he'd married after Helen, sobbed quietly in the front row. His children were notably absent. The judge set sentencing for the following month, but everyone knew Lucas was finished. The minimum sentence was 12 years. The maximum was life. Either way, the Golden Boy CFO would spend his best years in federal prison, his fortune seized, his reputation destroyed. As the bailiff led Lucas away, he turned one last time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw it then, the recognition, the understanding. He knew with absolute certainty who had destroyed him, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. I left before the crowd, slipping out a side door into the September afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving Charlotte's streets washed clean. I walked slowly back to my car, feeling the weight of the moment. Justice had been served. But I felt no joy, just a hollow satisfaction. Like finishing a complex equation. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Watch the news. Well played. H. Helen Trammell. I deleted the message and drove home. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, the same vintage I drunk the night I submitted my report to the SEC. I raised a glass to the empty room, toasting the end of Lucas Trammell and the system that had created him. Tomorrow, I'd return to my new life, my new firm, my new city where I was anything but irrelevant. But tonight, I allowed myself one moment of pure, vindictive satisfaction. I'd won. The sentencing came on a cold October morning, 18 years. The judge called Lucas's crimes a betrayal of market integrity and shareholder trust. I wasn't there to see it. I was in Atlanta, reviewing risk assessments for my new firm, building something clean and honest. The news alert on my phone was enough. Justice had been served. A year later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my company's building, watching the sun set over the Atlanta skyline. We'd just closed a major deal, completely above board. every detail scrutinized by my department. My CEO joined me, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. "You know," she said, passing me a glass, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For showing us what real integrity looks like. Half the firms in Charlotte are still recovering from the Aldrich scandal. The SEC is crawling through everything. But you stood up when it mattered." I sipped the whiskey. Let it burn. "I just did my job." "No," she said firmly. "You did more than that." Below us, the city hummed with life. Thousands of people making deals, taking risks, building careers. Some of them, inevitably, were cutting corners, trading on secrets, believing themselves untouchable. They'd learn, eventually. They always did. My phone buzzed, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." Inside, a single paragraph. "Ms. Caldwell, you don't know me, but I was a junior analyst at Aldrich during the Trammell years. I watched him destroy careers, mainly women's, always with that smile. I was too scared to speak up. You weren't. Because of you. I found the courage to report corruption at my new firm. The executive was terminated last week. Irrelevant women are changing the world." Anonymous. I deleted the email but kept the warmth it gave me. The wind picked up, carrying the sounds of the city. Somewhere in a federal prison. Lucas Trammell was eating dinner off a plastic tray, counting down 18 years of irrelevance. His former colleagues had scattered. His family name was tainted. His legacy reduced to a cautionary tale told at ethics seminars. And me? I was exactly where I wanted to be. Not famous, not celebrated, just competent and respected. My name would never appear in the case files. The SEC would never confirm their source. I was a ghost in Lucas's downfall. Invisible, but devastating. I finished my whiskey and headed back inside. There was work to do, risks to assess, a company to protect. The Lucas Trammells of the world would always exist. Men who confused power with invincibility, who dismissed half the talent in their offices as irrelevant. But we, irrelevant ones, we were watching. We were documenting. We were waiting. As I walked back to my office, I passed a group of young analysts, 3 women, 2 men, debating market strategies. One of the women was pushing back against a flawed assumption, her voice strong and clear. Nobody talked over her. Nobody dismissed her concerns. She was heard, valued, relevant. Maybe that's the real victory. Not just bringing down one corrupt executive, but creating spaces where being dismissed as irrelevant becomes impossible, where every voice matters, where the watchdogs are respected, not ridiculed. I settled back at my desk, pulled up the next risk report, outside my window. Atlanta's lights twinkled like stars. Somewhere among them were future whistleblowers, future fighters, future women who would refuse to be silenced. Lucas Trammell had called me irrelevant. It was the biggest mistake of his life. I smiled and got back to work. After all, someone had to keep watch. I didn't need to be remembered. I just needed him to be remembered, as a lesson, and he would be forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're in. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this tale of how one irrelevant woman brought down a corrupt CFO, please subscribe to the channel for more stories of revenge and redemption. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been dismissed or underestimated at work? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. Until next time. Remember, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody's watching.